Hey, what is up guys? Welcome to MST.TV. This is Nishi bringing you all another Market Watch episode. Today we're taking a look at some meta cards that are trending on the market, with people in the United States receiving their stimulus checks. That's money that a lot of people are going to be dumping towards purchasing cards, and with people buying up cards that are meta relevant, we were bound to see some of the prices of cards steadily increasing over the last week or so. The cards that people are targeting here are typically going to be cards that people see as having long-term value within the meta, that people think are going to continue to play an important role in the meta throughout the rest of 2021. So today we're breaking down some of those meta relevant cards that are trending to give you guys an idea of what players think are going to be important or unimportant cards in the upcoming formats. Let's get started. First up, let's take a look at AA Zeus. Zeus is one of the scariest cards in the current format, able to turn the entire game around if you're able to bring it out, and in my opinion is one card that is going to find its way into everyone's extra decks for years to come. Zeus's ability to send all cards on the field to the graveyard can completely swing a game in the opposite direction, and all you have to do is have one of your Xyz monsters battle that turn in order to go into it. It's a strong enough card that we're seeing decks like Drytron run multiple copies of Zeus so that they have the option of going into it multiple times, and we're even seeing different decks run odd cards such as Downerd Magician, Gaia Dragon, and Assembled Nightingale in order to make it with enough materials. If you've seen or played competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! At all in the last couple of months, then you're definitely aware of this card and the sort of impact that it can have on a game. Now, early on, we were actually seeing this card trend down towards the $40 to $50 mark. However, now we are seeing it up at around $60 to $70 a piece on TCG Player. There are several listings at $60 by newer sellers, but some posted by reputable sellers up at around the $70 mark. This card is brand new out of Phantom Rage, which is a set that didn't really have much value in it outside of Alpha and Zeus. People are bound to be looking for as much value in the set as possible, which could definitely be a contributing factor as to why this card is getting as expensive as it is. Anyways, this card is useful in multiple meta relevant decks, including 3 really big ones in Drytron, Virtual World, and Zodiacs, so we should expect it to remain expensive for quite some time. It does have a reprint expected in the 2021 Megatons that will likely cause it to drop in price eventually, but that isn't going to take place until the latter half of 2021. For now, if you're wanting to play this card, I don't see it dropping in price anytime soon. I would actually argue that it could go up a little bit higher, maybe towards the $80 mark if it sees enough play, so it's definitely justifiable to go ahead and pick up your copy of this card now. Next up, we have Access Code Talker. Now, in my mind, I think that Access Code Talker is a card that's very similar to how we used to look at cards like Borrelsword Dragon and Appaloosa, a staple rank 4 extra deck monster that everyone is playing that has the potential to win games entirely on its own, despite being something that was only $40 to $50 for quite some time early on in the card's lifespan. We saw it quickly jump up to $70 a piece before now being $85 to $90. It is just a one-of card, but this is still an extra deck staple for most strategies, being able to win games entirely on its own, as it can blow up boards without your opponent being able to respond to this card's effects. It's also really versatile since you can use a Link 3 such as Selene or Nightmare Unicorn along with one other monster in order to go into this, and it can get up to 5,300 attack points, which is really huge. Now, in terms of price, I think that this card is really similar to Zeus, right? It's an amazing extra deck boss monster, and it's also probably not going to be reprinted until the 2021 Megatons, so we should expect both of them to stay expensive as extra deck staples until we get closer to their reprint confirmations. I do think we could see a bit of flip-flopping between the two. Zeus is sometimes run in multiples, but I feel like Access Code is more of a staple where it's seeing play in absolutely everything outside of Virtual World, whereas there are some decks that maybe just don't have the room in the extra deck to accommodate the entire Zeus package. Either way, I hope that you picked up your copy of Access Code down at around the $70 mark or so, because given how staple the card is, I don't see it falling under the $80 mark anytime soon. Next up, we're looking at a couple of generic side deck cards that are widely regarded as some of the strongest in the game. First, we have Lightning Storm, which everyone thought was going to completely break the game as a card that could double as Raigeki or Harpy's Feather Duster, and for a while, Lightning Storm felt like it was going to be played in every single side deck at 3, since you could use it to completely blow out back row heavy decks such as Altergeist and Subterror, or alternatively, combine it with Dark Ruler No More to break established boards. And back then, we did see Lightning Storm over the $100 mark each, with a lot of people speculating that it could go over that to $120. It's really curious then that even now, where we're seeing a bunch of meta staples get bought out, Lightning Storm has actually gotten not very much attention at all, and is actually instead continuing to trend downwards. The card does still see some play, especially now where we're in a control format, where decks are playing actual back row, and it can be useful to clear random monsters such as Vanity's Ruler. However, I think there are two main reasons that Lightning Storm hasn't caught as much attention recently. Firstly, we're seeing games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Go for several more turns than before. In the last format, it was all about setting up that turn 1 board right away, so it was all about loading up your opening hand with all of these really powerful cards to blow out your opponent right off the bat. Now, however, with games lasting for several more turns, there's a decent chance that Lightning Storm could actually be a dead draw, which you don't want if your games are going to be lasting several turns. If you control something like a field spell, a Tenki, or a Chuchi, then Lightning Storm does become a brick. The second factor, I think, is that Lightning Storm is from Ignition Assault, which is actually the earliest of the 4 sets that are expected to be included in the 2021 Megatons. Therefore, there's actually a decent chance that we could see Lightning Storm reprinted a little bit earlier than expected, the way that we saw Boral Sword in Battles of Legends or Pot of Extravagance in Toon Chaos, both reprints that came earlier than the Megatons that they should have been regularly scheduled for. It's not a guarantee, but I think we should be keeping in mind that we could see Lightning Storm reprinted in the upcoming spring or summer reprint set, as the card was released almost a full year ago. With the possibility of being reprinted early, a lack of competitive events, and the very real possibility that we could see more and more decks choose to not run Lightning Storm in the side deck, I think that we could realistically expect to see Lightning Storm continue its trend downwards, or at the very least remain as low as it currently is and not bounce back up in price. So for me, this is a card that I would begin looking to move sooner rather than later. The other staple side deck card that I want to take a look at here is Forbidden Droplet, which has kind of been on the opposite trajectory as Lightning Storm. So with Droplet, I feel like we were seeing this card at around $80 not too long ago, but over the last couple of weeks, we've seen it shoot way up to over the $100 mark. Droplet has started to see a fair amount of play, especially in the Drytron deck. With the Drytron monsters, you can still use their effects out of the graveyard the same way that you would have used them in your hand, so paying the cost with Drytrons isn't that bad. It's also typically a way to let you get Eva into the graveyard as well. It's a really strong way to out cards like Vanity's Ruler and Herald of Ultimateness, and Zeus with only 2 materials, but the card is fairly weak against the Virtual World and Eldritch matchup. A lot of people look at Drytron as being the best deck of the format, so with cards like Infinite Impermanence and Dark Ruler No More not seeing a lot of play, you need a way to handle these problematic cards, and Droplet is looking like the go-to way to deal with them. Despite this, I don't feel like Droplet is maintaining this price point for very long. I think Droplet is the type of card that's only good in specific formats and only in certain decks, whereas with Lightning Storm, it's useful in a lot of different situations and can be played by basically anything. Droplet is a lot more restrictive. It can only be run in something that is able to send resources to the graveyard in order to negate an equal number of monsters' effects, and their monsters actually have to be vulnerable to Droplet as well. There are alternatives for Droplet such as Gamma, Effect Veiler, Infinite Impermanence, and Dark Ruler No More, all of which might be better than Droplet in certain situations. For me personally, Droplet is the type of tech card that I would 100% be looking to sell because it will inevitably rotate in and out of the format. With it also falling into the 2021 Megaton reprint realm of possibility, it's something that I wouldn't want to hold on to and be stuck with too close to that reprint date while it isn't seeing any usage in the meta and therefore is very difficult to move. Next up, let's look at Union Carrier. So Union Carrier is a card that I feel like everyone knows about, but kinda still gets overlooked quite a bit. Last format, we all know about this card because of the Buster Lock and how Union Carrier was abused to lock your opponent out of their extra deck extremely easily, and after the Buster Lock was banned, Union Carrier did fall in price a bit, bottoming out at around the $6 mark. However, it wasn't very long before we found another way to abuse this card, this time in Drytrons as a way to equip Dawn Knight out of your deck, who in turn can dump a light monster directly from your deck to the graveyard. As a result, we've seen Union Carrier climb really slowly up towards the $10 mark now. Honestly, I feel like this is still a relatively cheap price for a card such as this. As a key extra deck monster for one of the best decks of the format, it's definitely the type of thing that will continue to find ways to be abused by different decks as long as it remains in the game. It was short printed in the same set as Halki Fibrax and Verte Anaconda, both of which are much more expensive than Union Carrier at the moment. Personally, I think that Union Carrier is going to continue to trend upwards and could very easily hit the $13 to $15 mark. If it starts to see play in another meta relevant strategy, I could definitely see it hitting $20 a piece. There is something of a chance that it could be reprinted before that happens, as the card has now been out for almost a year, but despite that, I think that $10 is such a low price point that I would make sure that you pick up your copy of this card sooner rather than later, before the card has a chance to shoot up in price. So really briefly here, I want to talk about a card that just refuses to fall in price no matter how many times it gets reprinted: Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So Ash Blossom is continuing to see play in our current format, and I think that it has been a solid 3 of for 90% of the competitive format since its release. I do remember the card being bad for a very brief window, but I don't think it lasted too long, and all of a sudden, everyone was running it at 3 once again. It continues to see play even now, despite the existence of multiple other high impact hand traps in the game. Cards like Ciphering Gear Gamma, Nibiru, Drolan Lockbird, Artifact Lancia, and Dimension Shifter. Obviously, this card being so iconic, it has been reprinted multiple times, but despite those many reprints, its price still remains in the double digits. The way that this card's price has stayed high is unlike anything that we've seen from any other card, as typically with so many reprints, we'd expect the card to only be $1 or $2 by now. It was reprinted as a structure deck common, had a guaranteed printing in Dual Devastator, and then was actually extremely easy to pull in Maximum Gold, which was a really popular side set as well. Despite all this, the card for all versions is still $14 a piece, even for the common structure deck printing, which is absolutely ridiculous. At this point, I think that the only way that this card is going to get down into the single digits is if it gets reprinted as a rare in a side set like Genesis Impact, but even then, it'll probably still be a $5 to $7 card somehow. I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that despite the multiple reprints, this card remains somewhat pricey and isn't something that you should necessarily be eagerly looking to offload at a discounted price, because it is going to retain value despite multiple reprints. Next up, let's briefly here look at number 49 Fortune Tune. This is a rank 3 monster that allows you to detach a material from it instead of having it be destroyed, and it also can't be targeted by card effects. Now, interestingly enough, this card is being used as an extra deck option in Virtual Worlds, which is able to put out rank 3 monsters fairly easily as an alternative way to go into Zeus. Because this card can't be targeted, it means that your opponent can't use something like Dogmatica Punishment on it. You can also detach a material to save it from being destroyed by battle, so it doesn't necessarily have to run into a defense position monster in order to survive to meet Zeus's condition of having had one of your Xyz monsters battle this turn. Because of this card's newfound popularity, we're actually seeing Fortune Tune with barely any quantities on the market, with the cheapest ones available being $23 a piece. Obviously, this is really high for a card like this, as it was only a couple of dollars before the buyout, and I don't think that you should be paying this price at all, but for a card with only one secret rare printing from an all hollow side set, this card is going to be somewhat slow to get quantities listed back onto the market, especially because it's hyped for meta reasons. I would definitely expect this card to fall back down in price, though it may take a while, down to anywhere between the $5 to $15 mark, depending on just how many people are actually going to be looking to run this card in their Virtual World decks. This is the type of card where if you're able to, you should be offloading this card for as close to its hyped up price as possible, because it's almost definitely going to be tanking in price back down quickly. The last card I want to talk about today is Infinite Impermanence, a card that isn't really something that a lot of people are paying attention to right now. Impermanence is actually quite a bad card this format, at least compared to many of the other options available. Most notably, it underperforms in the Virtual World matchup, since the effects activate in hand, and Impermanence can't negate the effects of any of the Virtual World monsters, and even if you hold it for the True King of all calamities, they can simply pop the True King with Chuchi so that you're still locked out for the turn. This card may be okay against Drytron to deal with Vanity's Ruler, but really it's a lackluster card right now compared to other tech options available. Now, this timing is a bit interesting, as we did just see Impermanence reprinted in Maximum Gold, where it was somewhat difficult to pull. However, despite the reprint and lack of play, we are still seeing all of the lower rarity versions of Impermanence at the $20 to $25 mark, which is still pretty high. I think it's pretty clear that Impermanence is not the type of card that's going to be bad forever, it's just bad this current format, and it'll likely see play when we see some new decks take over the meta and Virtual World get rotated out. That being said, I think that now is actually a great time to buy into Impermanence, especially if you don't already have a set for yourself to use. If the card is going to be $20 while it's not seeing play, I think that there's a very strong chance that we could see the card bounce back to its previous market price of $30 to $40 once it starts to see play again. Of course, do take this with a grain of salt, as we do have to balance out the amount of time before the card is good again with the amount of time before the card sees another reprint, which could potentially tank its value even further. However, I do think that Impermanence is a staple card that is very similar to Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and even if it were to see another reprint, these lower rarity versions are still going to retain a significant chunk of their value. That being said, I wouldn't go out and purchase 50 or 100 copies of this card, but rather I think that picking up a set for yourself now while the card is cheap and somewhat affordable, and then maybe a few extra copies to potentially use to trade up in the future, is a fairly solid sounding idea. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. I know the meta is still fairly fresh, but we have to keep in mind that we do have Blazing Vortex coming out in just under a month, which means that we're going to see some changes happening to the meta and the market all over again. Nevertheless, it is always important to keep the meta in mind, even if you don't necessarily play competitively, because the meta is going to be one of the primary driving forces behind a lot of these buyouts and market movements that we see every day. Anyways guys, if you enjoyed today's Market Watch episode, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button for me and let me know. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards we talked about today, or let me know about other things that are happening on the market so I can potentially cover them in a future video to keep you guys as informed as possible. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button for all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself here on the channel. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.